Welcome, Comadres and friends. I'm Nora de Hoyos Comstock, and I'm filling in for Maria Ferrer, who had a little problem. But Maria is the project manager for Las Comadres and Friends Book Club, and she does an amazing job. The leadership team and I are pleased to have you join us for tonight's teleconference as we celebrate our book club's quinceañera. It has been our privilege to support Latino authors throughout these many years, and we look forward to the next 15. We'd like to extend a warm welcome to our readers following us on our live Twitter chat as well. Tonight, please help us welcome authors Teresa Palomo Acosta and Zoraida Córdova. Their interviews will begin shortly. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes. Please keep yourselves on mute. You can keep your video on if you like. And we suggest you put yourself on speaker mode so that the speakers are big as life. But gallery will work as well. If you use gallery, you get to see everybody whose videos are on. And if you have any questions and comments, please put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them. But first, let's start with our book club's history. Comadre Tess?
Hi, bienvenidos a todos. My name is Tess Tobin and I'm the submissions coordinator. Our first book club gathering was in July 2004 in New York in Comadre Maria Ferrer's apartment. After a hiatus, Nora Comstock re-envisioned and relaunched the book club nationwide to promote the work of Latino authors to every book lover, to bring our community to bookstores, and to support our writers. We started our teleconferences in October of 2006. We are in our 15th year of sharing works by Latino authors with all of you. We created the teleconferences as a book club to entice everyone to read more Latino authors, to learn about Latino roots and the different perspectives on Latino culture and heritage. Our book club and teleconferences are open to all, not just Latinos. We are creating a space for everyone to explore the Latino writer's mind and soul as portrayed through the written word. We encourage you to join our local book club in your city or time zone. We have clubs in 12 cities that are meeting virtually. There is sure to be one that can fit your schedule. If your city doesn't have one, why not help us start one? For more information about our book club, visit our website, latinolit.com. So please invite others to join us and the book club. I'm sorry. Comadre Karen, take it away, please.
Welcome, comadres and friends, to our May 2022 Zoom teleconference. I'm Karen Gonzalez, Assistant Coordinator for the Las Comadres and Friends Book Club, Denver Comadres Book Club Facilitator and co-founder of the Colorado Alliance of Latino Mentors and Authors. Thank you for joining us tonight. Tonight, we will begin with our interview with author Teresa Palomo Acosta. Teresa Palomo Acosta has dedicated her writing life to discovering, exploring, and preserving the culture and history of her community. Her work in history and literature include Las Tejanas, 300 Years of History, TEJANALAND, A Writing Life in 4 Acts, and more than 100 biographical sketches and articles for the New Handbook of Texas and the Handbook of Texas Music. TEJANALAND received a 2022 Liz Carpenter Award for Best Book on Women from the Texas State Historical Association. She was educated at UT Austin, becoming one of the school's first graduates in Mexican American Studies. She holds a master's degree from the Graduate School of Journalism at Columbia University in New York City. Interviewing Teresa will be Comadre Lidia Galvan, a native Texan and proud descendant of Spanish settlers who have been ranching in South Texas since the 1750s. Her ancestors arrived in Mexico in the 1530s as conversos, Jewish families who converted to Catholicism and were forced to emigrate to the New World to escape the Spanish Inquisition. They were among the first settlers in Saltillo, Mexico. Lydia is semi-retired after a successful 43-year career as a healthcare executive. Comadre Lydia, take it away.
Thank you, Karen. Teresa, I consider it a great privilege to discuss TEJANALAND with you. And I do need to thank you for your book that you co-authored with Ruth Weingarten, Las Tejanas, 300 Years of History. It fills a great void in the chronicle of the contributions of Mexican and Spanish and colonial women in Texas. So it's wonderful, and I recommend it to everyone that's an amateur historian. Can you tell us a little bit about deciding on TEJANALAND as your title, and specifically, where did the word originate, and does it have a special meaning for you?
Well, TEJANALAND actually is, based on the word Tejana, which is a word that Mexican origin women in Texas have taken on as a self-identifying way of talking about ourselves. When we wrote Las Tejanas, 300 Years of History, we wanted the title to include Tejanas. And there was a lot of opposition to that. People felt that no one would understand, it would turn people off. But Ruth and I felt it would be a teachable moment. And I'm glad that since that time, many years ago, more people have used that term in their work. As for this book, I was working with the opportunity to put together a manuscript that was of my choosing. And so I decided to draw on all these genres I had spent, a lifetime investigating in poetry, which is my great love, history, and essays, nonfiction, and theater. The term TEJANALAND to me is a way of engaging people with this notion that the people of Spanish Mexican origin, which includes Native people, African people, etc., it's a very large community, that it is a geographic and cultural and significant political landscape in which I live, and which really is not just a little place on the map somewhere. It's not just in Central Texas where many of my works were set originally, but that it really is something that should be recognized as a very authentic place in which people live out a life. So I thought of the title in different ways, and ultimately I thought that if you say TEJANALAND, you really give it this larger, broader context in which someone who is not Tejana needs to place themselves and understand how significant it is that Tejana is writing about this landscape, which has heretofore not included her understanding of what can happen in that space. So that was one thing that was so important to me, and I felt I had been nourished as a writer by the people who occupied the little house in which I grew up and introduced me to so much of what became my first writing in poetry.
Well, since you and Ruth initiated that word and using that word more, I hear more and more people using that term to describe all of us that are part of the fabric that is Texas. So I think the more we use the word, I would agree with you. It does encompass all of us, mestizos, Spaniards, Spanish heritage people, Mexican heritage people, and African Mexican as well. And I think it's wonderful. So it's a great term. I love it.
Thank you.
I was hoping that you'd explain so the audience would understand how it encompasses everybody.
Mhm.
Very inclusive, which is one of the gifts of that term. When did you realize that you were a writer and a poet? What brought you to that realization?
Well, when I was quite young, about 11 years old, I declared to my sister Olivia that I was going to be a writer. And I don't think I decided on poetry, but I said I was going to be a writer. And I spent about 5 years cogitating, and I was maybe about 16 when I first started writing. Then I first started writing poetry. I think the notion of being a creative person and in choosing writing came very early. I love to read. I learned to read fairly easily. I lived in a household with a grandfather who played violin, who had been an itinerant actor, and who would remember some of the lines he had said as he played in these roles. And so he was always talking to me about these things. My mother had a lovely voice. She always sang in the home. And when I decided that I wanted to be a writer, my mother was somehow aware of all these interests of mine. And she would say to visitors who came to see us, "Oh, let's be quiet, Teresa's writing." So it was something that I had a dream about doing because I love reading. And then I had a family that really encouraged me. And they answered a lot of my questions that I had about who we were, what we were, to the point that I have great nieces and nephews who would contact me and ask me, "What was that story my grandmother told you?" So it's followed me through all this time.
It sounds like you had a very supportive, creative family that formed the basis of your wanting to become who you are. That's wonderful.
Yes, and you know, my parents had been in McGregor, where I grew up, since the Great Depression. They got there when they were quite young. They came of age there. My mother was about 18 when she arrived. And as I got older, and when I went to the university, I would go home and visit them. We would go on these drives around the countryside in McGregor, and they would point out where they had lived, what had happened there. I knew where the dances had taken place in the little country roads. And all these fed my first poetry. And some of those poems are in this collection. So in some ways, they were co-writers with me, you know, telling me all these stories. And so that again, if you go back to the term TEJANALAND, that was a landscape of my imagination and the geography that's there.
Did they get to witness and experience some of your accomplishments?
Well, they sent me to the University of Texas. They sent me to Columbia University. And I don't think we ever really shared very many of the poems. The poems that came out that were published. The first when I was still at the University of Texas. But really, we didn't do that. We spent our time talking about the experiences, and then I went off and wrote the works. And that is a regret of mine that we didn't share that in terms of the actual finished writing. What we shared were the experiences that resulted in the work.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Casa de Amor, one of your plays. It's about the tragic accidental death of a child during a hunting accident and how it affected the family. Was this based on a family incident or a friend or an actual incident you were aware of?
You know, it isn't. I spent a full year writing what's a trilogy of plays. The third play is not in the book, but I think I had a strong desire to set down this story about a Tejano family that was growing up in the midst of what people would call country western land, where there's a strong presence of white individuals, Anglos. We were the minority when I was growing up. And there was always this kind of cultural conflict about who we were, who they were. And one of the things in Casa de Amor is I wanted to look at the way the values have inculcated themselves in different ways across streams. And this young woman she's somewhat out of the generation I come from. You know, she wants to go to San Francisco, where, you know, the hippies are, so she says. She's very much drawn to trying to discover how she can live her life having lost her son. So it just came out of my imagination based on my own reading at that time. I had no idea that the topic of gun violence would then become so important in terms of this country. Because the play was written in 1988, which is a long, long time ago.
Mm-hmm. Well, hunting and drinking and guns seem to go together in what has become Texas Hispanic culture. And I was just curious about that because it seems like we have the Hispanic community has adopted some of, as you say, some of the customs, but also added the drinking and the hunting together. And I was curious about the accident because I know of 3 or 4 accidents like that.
Really? Well, I think that there was I was trying to make an effort to write about the conflicts between men and women in terms of this issue of this young couple and how they were going to handle this. And in my view, the lead character has had to become a strong person. She's seen a little bit as an unusual person, but I leave the ending of the play very open-ended because I'm sort of interested in the audience deciding for themselves what can happen.
Well, your educational and your career background is as a historian and a scholar, and that shows in your writing. But poetry is so personal, yet you kind of weave some of the history that's going on in certain parts of your poems. And I wanted to ask, is it very difficult to switch from that hat that you wear where you're a historian and a scholar to the hat that you wear when you're writing as a poet that's so personal?
Well, poetry has always come naturally to me. That's my beloved genre. I continue to write poems, not every day, but several days a week. So I don't find it any kind of a conflict at all. I just know that when I do research, I have to base that on sources and materials that I can discover or find in libraries to write. When I did the particular essays that are in this book, I did them about individuals or topics that were really important to me in terms of what Tejanas have accomplished. And some of those Tejanas I write about, really all of them are my literary abuelas, who I did not know really anything about until I was an adult. So in terms of, there's not a real switching back and forth. I would say that when I write poetry, I feel very free, much freer than when I do the fact-based materials that I because you really have to try to get it right. You have to make sure that you have the sources are correct.
Oh, switching gears. In your essays, you include a poem called Season of Change. There is a passage that has the most beautifully worded phrasing that's crisp and clear, and you provide a visual of imagining yourself sitting at a table with Emily Dickinson. And if I have your permission to quote you from the poem.
Sure.
Okay. Savoring her rhubarb pie in my cafecito, chatting and chismeando, and trading secrets despite decrees demanding silence between us. Women from separate corners of the room. I love that. Can you expand on what inspired that lovely thought?
Well, I do admire and respect Emily Dickinson a great deal as a poet. I think she had some wonderful achievements and used language in a way that her peers didn't really understand. She would write to people and ask them to tell her if her poems breathed. And that's something that probably a writer would say. What I wanted to do in that poem, because I have another poem about Emily Dickinson called Emily Dickinson and Her White Youth. The color white is associated with some of Dickinson. And in this poem, I really was exploring the idea that women who come from very different worlds, and women in TEJANALAND can come from very different worlds, right? Whether or not we're Tejanas or we're Tejanas and non-Tejanas, and that they have many things that they need to talk about, that they can discuss. And even though the silence that has been decreed by outsiders, the women don't have to take that into account if they want to. We all know that very often when women get together with other women, in 2 seconds, they're talking about very important and deep and personal things. And it's just happens, not all the time, but it's something that's very normal. And I wanted in a way to make this statement that there's something really beautiful about the fact that you can't be separated, even though the rules and regulations may want you to be. And certainly I felt that poem, which I wrote years ago, was very key to what I was trying to accomplish in that essay, which is about the collaboration between Ruth Weingarten, and who's Jewish, and the Tejana, me, and how we work together. And so it was a perfect way of talking about, how differences can enrich the experiences that we have.
Thank you. I went back to read the poem you wrote that you based Colchas Colchitas on, the children's book.
Oh, yes, my mother piece quilts.
Yes, my mother, and it brought back so many childhood memories of sitting as a very young child with my great aunts who were much older, and all of their friends sitting in a circle, and they would be making quilts together. All these ladies, and they'd have their cafecito and their pan dulce, and it would just be a wonderful, such a wonderful warm memory for me when you were talking about that in this. It felt like you were talking about it in your book, the children's book. Are you Carolina? And is
No,
the
my one and only niece is named Carolina, so I named the character for Carolina. And you know, the poem, the poem gave me the opportunity. It's a long story behind it, writing the poem, and it's discussed in the book introduction. But it was Carolina. I wanted to honor my lovely, wonderful niece, Carolina, and she's very happy that she's the lead character in that story of her and her abuela. And I really wanted to people the story with things or individuals who had accomplished wonderful things. There's a writer in there. There are other people, and so I wanted to show that we are people who have created all these wonderful things. And in Carolina's case, her grandmother is a teacher of how quilts unite and bond the family in many ways.
I love the metaphor about piecing your life together, piecing lives together, and the creativity that women have, and it was just beautifully done.
Thank you.
I'm disappointed that the children's book is not out, because frankly, Colchas Colchitas is a wonderful vehicle to teach elementary school children about many, many positive themes, whether they're Hispanic or not. And I was wondering, have you considered resubmitting that for publication?
You know, that poor story has gone through so many years, and I finally decided, well, if I can get it published, even without the illustrations, of which there are some beautiful illustrations that Teresa Palomo did for me. She's from Argentina. We almost got the opportunity to be represented by the agent, and then the agent decided that they couldn't do it. And so we did a very small run with the illustrations. They're beautiful illustrations, but for this book, we weren't able to do that. But I would love to see it as a children's book, a separate. Who knows if that can happen? Perhaps it will. But I haven't pursued it. I haven't pursued it since a long journey I had for years.
Oh yes, but it's a beautiful book, and I would love to have if you ever publish it, I would definitely love to have a copy to give to children that I know, because it's beautiful. And my librarian sister would love it.
Oh.
Are you working on a new book right now?
Well, I'm working on a journal that I've started in 2019 with the idea that I would finish it in 2020, and I was going to leave for Spain again, but with the pandemic that changed. And the Weingarten Foundation for Texas Women's History has started an opportunity for women in Texas who wanted to write about the pandemic and their experiences. So the journal, which is called Esperanza, is now about 100 pages, single space. I don't write it every day. It's a combination of narrative and poetry. And so that's the only thing that I'm working on that's consistently. I haven't gone back to revise it at all. I'm not sure when we'll be finished, because we're now in pandemic number 4. But I may have to draw close to it myself. So that's what I'm working on, right now.
Can you recommend some books on Tejana or Spanish colonial history and feminism, possibly?
I would. I probably have to submit them to you later in writing, but I think that there's some very important works that are being produced by Tejana historians, and I think that the work on Jovita by Gabriela Gonzalez is really important because of Idar's significance. Comita Gonzalez, who I write about in the Las Tejanas, in TEJANALAND, was a wonderful novelist who actually co-wrote Caballero with another author. So I think that the area of Spanish colonial women, Antonia Castañeda did a lot of work on Spanish colonial women, although her work centered mainly in Spain, in California. Antonia is a Tejana, but she received her doctoral training in California. So I think she began to focus on the women of that state. And it's an incredible and fascinating history of the Spanish women in California.
Well, I'm interested in that as well, as I'm sure many of our California listeners would be. Teresa, if you would be willing to send a list of some recommendations to your friend Celia, I can go ahead and make sure the comadres all get it.
Sure, I'll be happy to do that. Definitely.
Because it would be great to have a recommendation. Well, I've just gotten a note that I just did I got cut off. It's my last question that I could ask you because we're out of time, and I'm sorry because I've got so many more questions to ask. But I wanted to thank you so much for allowing us to speak with you, and hopefully we'll get to talk again.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you.
Oh, gracias, comadres. Interviewing Zoraida will be Comadre. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Our second interview is with author Zoraida Córdova, an acclaimed author of more than a dozen novels and short stories, including the Brooklyn Brujas series, Star Wars, Galaxy's Edge, A Crash of Fate, and The Inheritance of ORQUIDEA Divina. In addition to writing novels, she serves on the board of We Need Diverse Books, is the co-editor of the best-selling anthology Vampires Never Get Old, and is the co-host of the writing podcast Deadline City. She writes romance novels as Zoe Castillo. Zoraida was born in Guayaquil, Ecuador, and calls New York City home. Interviewing Zoraida will be Comadre Tess Tobin. Tess has been a member of Las Comadres Book Club since 2008. She is currently the submissions coordinator and enjoys supporting the book club and reading Latino Lit. Comadre Tess, take it away.
Hi, Zoraida.
Hi, thank you guys for having me back.
Yes, we're so happy you're here. I was just thinking, I was talking to Julia today about your last visit, and then you came to our New York City Book Club meeting. I don't know if you remember.
Yes, I do remember.
And that was just great. But now we have another wonderful book of yours that we've read, and I'll just start with my first question. So your website title is Magic and Mayhem. We find it very apropos given your recent series, The Brooklyn Brujas, and this new book, The Inheritance of ORQUIDEA Divina. You roam the world in search of magical stories. Where did this one come from?
The Inheritance of ORQUIDEA Divina is a novel about an Ecuadorian family that happens to find themselves in the United States because of their matriarch, ORQUIDEA Divina. And the original story idea came from a short story, which is included in the anthology Toil and Trouble, 15 Tales of Women in Witchcraft. And that anthology came out around 2017. And I wrote a story about a woman who transformed into a tree. She like invites people to her death. Very dramatic, right? Like abuela. You know, like nobody visits me, please come to my death party. And all of her descendants, her grandchildren, her estranged family, they show up to her house in the middle of a valley, and they're there for their inheritance. And so I got the opportunity to work with an Ecuadorian editor at Atria, and she was also the editor for Isabel Allende. So I was like, I gotta give her something real good. And so, you know, we because I felt like I really needed to step up my game. And so I decided to turn that short story into a full novel. So it just became a matter of, okay, so this woman is in this valley. She's invited her family to her death day. She is going to give people the inheritance. What is their inheritance? And what happened to her that she had to flee her home country and go somewhere to be a recluse, right? Because when she gets to the town of Four Rivers in the middle of nowhere, USA, she never leaves. One trip was enough for her. But her descendants now, they're like itching to go and to explore places, but she's like, we can't leave, we have to stay here. This is our safe space. And then terrible things happen. And so that's sort of where the story came from. It's just like a short story that became a novel. And I really wanted to write about an Ecuadorian family like mine. Mine's a little bit more functional than Montoya's, but that's debatable.
Right, I know. And this book is so rich. I mean, with just many characters, and you weave in, the present with the past. It's really flows very nicely. So I imagine now you are from Guayaquil.
Mhm.
Okay, and this is where the grandchildren go back to find out about ORQUIDEA. Did you have to revisit that town, or did you the areas in the book where you write about it?
In 2018, I went back. I mean, I used to go back to Ecuador once a summer, like, during school, because my father still lives there, and all of my father's family still lives there. My mom's family is all here in New York.
Right.
But some of them are in Texas and Florida. My mom's family is a little bit more all over the place. But the Cordovas are in Ecuador, and I went back in 2018 with my uncle, my uncle's husband, my best friend, and my brother. My brother hadn't gone since he was 10 years old. So it was 15 years later that he returned to Ecuador. And for me, it had been maybe 3 years, because I did make it a point to go back and see my dad and some family. And it's also just a beautiful place. So I just, but Guayaquil is a city, it's a huge port city. It used to be called the Pearl of the Pacific. It was a place of a lot of export, bananas, coffee, all of that stuff. We had a lot of farms. There was a terrible drought in the 50s that really killed all of that. But the export of orchids was big, right? Orchids and roses really populate the market, and they come from Latin America. So next time you buy roses, see if they're from Colombia or from Ecuador, because probability are sometimes they are. And so I did, the place where ORQUIDEA is from is called La Tarazana, and that's where my family's neighborhood was. And it's a neighborhood, right? It's a neighborhood in a big city. It's kind of like being from the Lower East Side, or I don't really know subsets of like Houston's a city, but there's towns, within
right,
Houston,
little communities,
right? Communities. And so La Tarazana is this one really long street that is a neighborhood, and it's right by the river, El Rio Guayas. And I had to do a lot of research, because my family was one of the first people that really started to populate that neighborhood, because before it used to be a place of where they were shipyards,
right?
So close to the river. And then so there's really there was nothing there in the time period of the book except for shipyards. So I had to take authorial liberty to change that and to say okay, this woman arrived, this woman pregnant out of wedlock, she's going to build a house here, and then other people come. So that's, I did go back, long story short.
Oh, good. How did you come up with the characters' names? Do they have any special meaning? I mean, I just love the name ORQUIDEA also. And are there any family names related to you?
There are some family names. I try to be careful, because every time you make somebody a villain, you make somebody a villain that's one of your family members, they're like, do you hate me? But ORQUIDEA, I just really like in the original story, her name was Rosa, but then I just felt like the metaphor of orchids coming from Ecuador. Her father was a sailor who he was in one of those shipyards, you know, he was in the
Right.
port working on import export, and he brought his mom an orchid. And so that's he brought Orquidea's mom an orchid, and so like when she was thinking of a name for her child, she chose Orquidea. And the other main character, her name is Marimar, and I named her obviously because of the Thalia telenovela Marimar, because I'm a millennial. And so but it fit for her. It fit for her. And I go into why names are important. You know, Raimundo, his name is Raimundo, but it's spelled with an E because he's a king, right? And so like those are I really pay attention when I name people in my books.
Right. Good. Abuelas are often the matriarchs of the family, as we can clearly see in your book. Orquidea is the center, the tree from which everyone else springs, and the tree itself is symbolic of the tree of life. Did you start the story with the tree, or did Orquidea become the story and then you came up?
I started the story with an image. So I kept thinking of like, I kept imagining this woman who turns into a tree, and then I had to ask myself, well, why? And then I went from there. And that's usually how I start stories. Is I have an image that I can't get rid of, and then I have to answer all these questions about that image, right? Why is she turning into the tree? How is she turning into a tree, right? Because like the thing about magical realism is that it's magic in the mundane. So ordinary things happen, right? Like, okay, like an angel came down from heaven. It's not enough that it's just an angel. Like this angel is now doing my laundry. Like that's magical realism versus fantasy. And so I just had the image of the tree, and then the story fell around it.
Right. I mean, you know, you take us all over. I mean, I enjoyed the part with Raimundo in New York when he's going to school. I mean, you just were so full of detail. You know, you just really felt like you were there with everybody as the story progressed. I really enjoyed it. Are you working on anything now? I know you said you've been having a few deadlines, but how is your writing coming now?
Well, I'm working on, I have a lot of different genres. So my next book comes out in the fall. It's a Star Wars novel. So I don't know if there are any Star Wars fans.
Wow.
Yeah, and so thank you, Julia. And so I have an adult novel for the Star Wars universe in the series called The High Republic. I have a book that is in a series called Meant to Be, which the first book was written by Julie Murphy. The second book was written by Jasmine Guillory. I don't know if you guys follow romance at all, but it is a retelling of the Disney princesses as sort of like modern young women. And so I'm doing Princess Ariel as a modern pop star. And so it's a little different. And my next novel is called The Fall of Rebel Angels. And it's about an angel who falls from heaven during, the rebellion of heaven. And he's searching, his punishment is to search for his wings for eternity. And this time in the modern age, he lands in this woman's garden, and she is accused of having something to do with her ex-boyfriend's, her ex-lover's disappearance. And so they both sort of have to find redemption in 7 days. And so that comes out in 2023. So I'm working on that.
How do you switch gears? I mean, you have so many different genres that you work under. Is it helpful for you to have one story and then you switch, you totally switch to another genre? Does that help with your writing, you think?
It does, because I know I'm always going to write fantasy and I'm always going to write romance. So those two things are, whether it's for younger kids or for adults, I think that that's sort of my wheelhouse. And I feel comfortable jumping back and forth.
Oh, that's great. Many of your fans also love your vampire books, and you recently have the best-selling vampire anthology, Vampires Never Get Old. We have to ask, Vampires or witches? Do you have a preference?
I think I want to say witches. Yeah, I'm gonna say witches.
Okay. You want to talk more about that or?
I think it's because I'll probably go back and forth, but I have my series, the Brooklyn Bruja series, and I love making up magic and mythology. And so I think that with the Brujas, I had a really good opportunity to do that. Although I hope one day I get to write like a full vampire novel.
Okay, great. We look forward to it if you do. I guess this question comes from when we met in New York. It says, you went through a period at 27 when you were writing Labyrinth Lost that you almost quit writing. Thankfully, that feeling went away and you've written numerous books since then. Do you still feel uncertain at different times during your writing? Is that normal? This is people have given me questions. So
Yeah, I think that like I fluctuate. Sometimes I love it, and sometimes I'm like, why do I do this to myself? But I feel like angst is a big part of the writing process for me. And at the end of the day, I'm like, well, I don't know how to do anything else. So I feel, this is my calling, and I feel like I've answered it.
yeah, I think you have. I think you've been very fortunate. This is a question from one of the other groups. It says, did you think of making your story longer by having stories about her other husbands? I was wondering how they died or if there were any odd occurrences with those marriages. We don't get to know much about the other husbands.
Yeah, so Orquídea has been married quite a lot.
Yeah.
Part of her bargain, part of like her magic is that she can have anything she wants, but there's going to be a big price. So she can have a great love, but it's not going to last for very long. And so when she's ready, another love comes along and then he's gone, right? But she always has something left behind, which is like a kid or a bunch of kids.
Yeah.
And so her family keeps growing in that way. I feel like the story could have been like 900 pages, to be honest. But I really wanted to focus on Marimar, Ray, and Orquídea and their story. And I feel like if I had gone into her husbands and how they died, other than just like a couple, like a paragraph, it would have detracted from what the book is about, which is Orquídea and her relationship to her grandchildren.
Right. Yeah, I can see that. Very good. So is there anything you'd like to say to young writers out there? Any recommendations or?
So I think my biggest advice to young writers is to read everything. I think that it's important to work on craft. I know that like our publishers and it's like the social media aspect of writing can almost take over your life. And so the most important thing is to just keep working on your craft because your stories will last longer than an Instagram story. And so that's really important to read everything, right? Like if you think you don't like romance, just give one a try. If you think you don't like nonfiction, find the subject that you really like. I didn't really think I liked reading nonfiction, but then I started finding these like sort of like trivia books about pop culture, and I really like them. And recommendations. So there's a book coming out at the end of the month called A Caribbean Heiress in Paris. And it's by Adriana Herrera. She's a Dominican author. It is about a young heiress, obviously a Caribbean heiress, who she's inherited this rum distillery from her father, and so she goes to the World Fair in Paris at the turn of the century. So it's Gilded Age. And she travels there with other Latina heiresses during that time period, and she makes she has what's my favorite trope is like marriage of convenience with a Scottish surprise duke. It is one of the best books that I've read in the last couple of months. It's romantic, it's very spicy. So if you like romance like that, it's, great. It's romantic, it's real, like you see the histories of people that are normally forgotten or marginalized. Like, when do you read a romance? Like, Bridgerton is diverse in the show, but like, you're not going to find that in the book. So if you want like what the show is giving you, you should read A Caribbean Heiress in Paris.
Yeah. I think we're looking at that as a future book.
Yeah. So I love it. It's like the only book in the last couple of months that I went to sleep reading it, and then it was the first thing that I woke up doing, right? Like, so it was great. Also by Alexis Daria. She has a book series of contemporary romances featuring Latinas. And so they're called You Had Me at Hola and A Lot Like Adios.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you, Zoraida. We're so happy you were able to join us tonight. I know I enjoyed the book, and I'm sure other comadres have enjoyed all your books.
Thank you so much.
Good luck with everything, and we look forward to what's coming next. So thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you.
Comadre Nora?
That was fun. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited about the books and our authors. Our thanks to both Teresa Palomo Acosta and Zoraida Córdova. Their publishers, Texas A&M University Press and Atria Books, an imprint of Simon & Schuster, for their generous donation of books to our early registrants. Thank you as well to our interviewers, Comadre Lidia and Comadre Tess. We thank our audience for taking the time to join us tonight, and to those who submitted questions. And we'd like to thank all our volunteers without whom this book club and all the associated work would not happen. Mil gracias. Please remember to support our authors by writing a review of their books on sites like Amazon, Goodreads, Barnes & Noble, etc. Those reviews carry weight with our publishers as well as with other readers. Buy books to support our authors, and if your library does not have one, ask them to order it. And please attend your virtual book club gatherings and bring a friend or two. Remember that our book club is open to men and women, Latinos and non-Latinas, or Latinos. All are welcome. Our June books are Ballad of Love and Glory by Reina Grande and Neruda on the Park by Clevis Natera. Again, thank you all for your continued support of our book club and Latino literature. Please join us in celebrating our quinceañera throughout the year by buying books and supporting Latino authors. Good night to all. And remember, read Latino Lit.
Good night, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care. Good night.